It's Sayed here, and I am the CEO of a IT service company, and I have the honor of having Richard Catizone with me. I call him Master of Digital Transformations, and we're going to go through two sections today. One will be more about we'll be I'll be asking questions, he'll be answering them, and then the second is where Richard will go into more details about digital transformation and what he's done. So let's start the presentation. So I'm going to share a Q&A slide, and I'll walk everybody through it as well. So what you'll be seeing is snakes and ladders. As somebody's seen the game, it's basically you have a snake, you go down, and ladder, you go up. Hopefully more ladders than snakes here. So the first question, simple, is please give the audience a brief bio about yourself, so that we may know you and understand, the value to this webinar.
Sure. Thanks, Syed. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Real quick, my background, I started off as an engineer. I'm an engineer at heart. Came out of school as an engineer. I worked with a big engineering firm back in the day named Motorola, if anyone can remember that brand. Pretty big company when I worked for them. They were about 150,000 employees and a $70 billion company with 6 major businesses. All of those businesses have different names these days. You'd know them as different companies like On Semiconductor and Nokia Networks and so forth. But in doing engineering, I was always very thoughtful on why are we building what we're building? How are they selling it, and what do the customers want? So that curiosity got me into going to get an MBA. And through doing that, I decided to put my business hat on for a while. And I worked in semiconductors and software, doing multiple roles, starting in field technical sales all the way to sales management and to global sales and marketing roles. And through the years, I've been able to wear multiple hats in technology leadership and business leadership. And that's really the path that got me to digital transformation and what I'm doing today.
Perfect. So we'll get into more details a little later. Then section 2 is, how did you end up working with companies on digital transformations? How did that happen?
Absolutely. So in wearing all of those hats, it became very clear where companies were having difficulties. One of the biggest things that I saw is the bridge between technology and business, right? And in having leadership roles in both, you can see how they interact in companies, and how they're seen to work together. And in the perfect world, they integrate and they work well together and everything goes great. But in reality, they're very different disciplines. What the technology groups do, the way they roll out technology, their disciplines are very different from how sales and marketing interact with customers and what they do with customers. And in the end, there's a gap there. And I saw an opportunity to take what I had learned over all of these years and apply them to both of those groups and organizations as a whole to help them to drive better outcomes and to use digital transformation as an actual transformational tool.
Got it. Perfect. So, just a follow-up question on that, and I think we'll get into more details, but, sometimes it is, since you've seen both sides, the sales side and the engineering side, and a lot of people here are either they're on the engineering side or the IT side, or they may be on the sales side, but it's very hard to get somebody who's done both, right? Sales not as a technical person on a sales team, but a salesperson doing, sales, hitting quotas like you're going to mention.
Yep.
How does one kind of get that perspective of, what the sales or the customer facing people get, as a person in, let's say, technology?
Yeah. So to your point, right? So having worn the hats, you get a very unique perspective. Working, engineering something and building it from the ground up and actually designing around technology can be very different from carrying a bag and trying to get a quota in sales and being in meetings on a quarterly basis on whether company is growing or not, and so forth. So obviously the easiest way to do that is you have to wear those hats, but that's a tough transition and that's not easy for everyone to do. So we'll talk more on some of the ways that this works and how to integrate that, but you definitely want to be aware of the other side. You want to collaborate and coordinate with people in both sides of the organization and all sides of the organization, and aligning where you can to achieve business results is the key. And you're going to see that a couple of foundations I built digital transformation around is business leading the technology, and we'll give more examples around that very specifically. And then cross collaboration and running it as a transparent strategic initiative is very, very important. And that really, I think, are the keys to bridging that gap. And that's a secret formula for getting this stuff to work. And we'll talk about that in more detail.
Got it. Okay. Snakes, what to watch out for? Tell me a time when you actually failed at rescuing a project, like kind of the scenario and what happened, and and then
yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of reasons projects will fail, and I think we'll go through a list of that a little bit later on. The biggest one I can remember at this point was, we're going to talk about the need to have executive support and breaking through those collaboration barriers in organizations. No matter how collaborative you want to be, there's always going to be silos in politics inside of organizations. And there's always going to be that divide that I had talked about earlier between technology and business. And if you don't have the CEO support, it's easy to let the technology side wallow away in proof of concepts and things that don't actually get applied to the business. Without the right leadership and the right way to drive it through and the right executive support. So one of the biggest failures I've seen is when the executives didn't take the time to understand the business outcomes, put the right leadership in place to assure that it would happen and give them enough autonomy to get it done. And like I said, it's when you say failure, it's what does failure look like? Well, it's not like it and one day it was working and then it stopped working and it failed. Failure tends to look like a slow burn of working and doing a lot of things and not really getting anywhere. And that's the one that I've actually seen. And it's one of the worst kind of failures because it takes everyone's time and money and it leaves a lot of scars and it's very, very difficult. So I've seen that and a few other ways that things will fail that we'll talk about later that should definitely be avoided and can be avoided if you use the right tools.
Got it. Okay. All right. So the section 4. So what does the future look like for obviously digital transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this one because I think it's really fun. So when you look back at the origins of digital transformation early on, right? So companies were very paper-based, a lot of walking around with paper, and ERPs came along, Oracle, SAP, all the really big companies that built out of that. And what they did is they basically were digitizing people's transactions. And in the early days, it was a big deal, and it was a big deal for them to do that. But what people found very quickly was when you start to digitize transactions, you really have just moved some information from one place to another, right? And where the real business transformations or the changes happen is what you do with that to make the job easier, to show you things that you couldn't readily see before, right? And that is translated into newer processes and newer systems, right? So a new thing these days is Internet of Things or customer-based applications on phones, right? So that's where digital transformations are going these days. And what happens is those can easily turn into the same thing. You spend a lot of time gathering data, you spend a lot of time plumbing data, but in the end, you see that if that's all that you do, all that you're really showing people is different forms of the same data that you have. So I think the future is applying intelligence into that and bringing insights out to people where they're at, things that they didn't even necessarily know they needed to know. So that involves data analytics. That's all the buzzwords that you hear around artificial intelligence and machine learning. Those are very real technologies. They're very accessible. And if they're applied the right way, they can really transform the whole interaction. And I think that's the future. The future is having intelligent systems and companies that know their products and know their business well enough, taking the time to bring that intelligence out to their customers and giving them an interaction and a platform that differentiates them from everybody else in the market that's doing that. I see that coming along, little by little these days, and I think it's going to pick up steam, and it's going to really, really be important moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, a great example that I think everybody's aware of is Amazon, right? So if you bought this, like I bought a ring light, and then it says, well, you might need the mic, or you might need two other things. And I'm like, okay, so, to intelligence, I mean, another good example is McDonald's, right? Like their app, when we talk McDonald's, I'm just talking about the app right now. So bought, I don't know, couple of one or two fries and some burgers or sandwiches, and I got that, like every time that I have not logged in, it says you have free fries waiting for you, or it has happened once or twice. So I was like, okay, so what, at least not me, but the kids want. So that level of intelligence is there, right? So they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. And they generate interest in the people that might not have been thinking about it at that point. They can get customers to sway a decision at that point because they weren't, it wasn't accessible, or they weren't thinking about it. And that intelligence is going to be pervasive, and the ones that can take advantage of it are going to have a big upper hand.
Absolutely. So the second part is like, what would you tell yourself? I know you went to Purdue,
Yeah.
so
Well,
and so what would you say to yourself when you just graduated college, like life lesson and business lesson?
Yeah, I'm very career oriented, so these might be a little bit similar, but they're going to be from a different angle. So the life lesson I think about is that, it's great to be driven for a career, or know what you want to do, and be interested in doing well in business. But remember that all the things around you, which include friendships and family and interactions and enjoying life, those all play a very large role in that success as well. So I would tell young me to enjoy that as much as you are the career side, and you'll actually get more out of it than you thought you could on both sides. And then, interestingly enough, when I look back on the career advice, and I would tell this to anybody that's coming out of school as well, when you have the opportunity and you're coming up in organizations and in businesses, try to get involved in as many different functional areas as you can. Try to wear as many hats as you can and do different things, because that diversity of experience as you get older is very, very important for organizations and businesses. And the more you can cross those lines and be helpful all the way through workflows and out to the major business outcomes, it makes a big difference. And one of the things I'd say is, if you're not uncomfortable, and I got this from a mentor myself, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. So you always want to put yourself into situations where you can challenge yourself, learn more, and grow. And if you do that over time, you'll be very, very happy with the results that come out on the other
end. That is awesome. That's great. So let's move into the next section, which is the open questions. And this is more related to what is digital transformation, right? I'll give an example, and then you can talk about this slide as well. But when it comes to digital transformation, like let's say I'm working at a company and we want to implement, I don't know, SharePoint, right? And obviously there is some transformation there, but what would you say, like when a company is, there are companies at various stages, obviously, but the company wants to implement SharePoint, and this is transformation. Is it really digital transformation? Like what's the marker here for digital transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me define that, the digital transformation itself, because that's a loaded question. A lot of people say that, and then we'll kind of get back to your example, and I'll apply it back, and I'll map it back to there. So one of the reasons I came up with this visual is I wanted to show what a complex problem it is. So reading kind of from left to right, if you see the two word clouds I put on the left there, I looked for these on the web, looked all over the place, and you'll see the top one is more technology based. And then when you start to look at the bottom one, it's more business based. And you can even see that business and technology divide when you talk about digital transformation itself. But word clouds are used to show complex situations and try to kind of uncomplicate them. And I just wanted to show that exists, that everyone kind of agrees it's a complex problem. When I try to define it myself, simplistically, it's the use of technology to strategically drive business outcomes. That's a loaded statement in and of itself as well. And I'll give more examples why that's so important. It is a complex problem with many moving parts, and that's what led me on the right of the slide here to write a digital transformation guide. I did that a few years ago. And what I wanted to show is, as complex as it is, there are very specific steps and there are very specific ingredients and inputs that you need to put into this, and you can build a process out of it. And if you can take the steps, you can have the right leaders along the way, you can go along a journey, because it is a journey, and you can come out the other end with some real business outcomes that are money makers and can transform the business. And I think that's really important. Now, Syed, you were asking me about, okay, hey, if we're doing SharePoint, is that digital transformation? And what I'll argue is, SharePoint, again, is what we had talked about earlier. You're digitizing transactions. You're making it easier for people to communicate. And interestingly, in 2022, those kinds of technologies, I consider them to be table stakes, right? Because people can't work fast enough without those types of tools. So, doing that specifically, I think, is important for any organization at the bottom. But again, for you to really tie out to what is going on the business standpoint, and for organizations in IT to look more like business drivers and less like cost centers, I think it's really important that you get out to those business outcomes. You get out to your senior leadership and understand how you're driving business. And what you'll find out is, if you're building a new product that has a new way to interact with customers, that's a major business transformation. That's something that means something to the entire business. Well, that is going to require some partnership involvement and some development of technologies underneath it. And someplace, when you peel back the onion enough, you're going to start to see that you can't do any of that fast enough if you don't have some of these communications tools like SharePoint, right? So there's always a way to move it back out to the business outcomes. But to do that, you really need to know the outcomes themselves and what you're trying to drive at the end of the transformation. And then you'll be able to tie all the technologies into that. I think that's key, and that's important.
Got it. I just wanted to mention a specific example when it comes to, you mentioned that it's a use of technology. I'm just paraphrasing, use of technology to drive a business outcome. So I was working on a website. This is a fun one. I was working on a website, and when you hit a tab, like any tab, and there's like a drop down, the problem we found was that you had to be super fast to go down to click on any of the sub menus there. And we were working as a consulting company, and we said, hey, make this process slower. And they were like, are you what are you talking about? People want their at least uploading a website, it needs to be a certain speed. We said, that's perfectly fine. We're saying just slow this process down, because no human is going to click on something and then obviously a drop down menu comes up and they're just going to fly down to the correct sublink and click on that. So I thought that was a funny way of looking at it, that when it comes to a digital transformation, it's not always the fastest, or like sometimes being slow, in this case, the specific example, was a better use case than being fast, right? Like,
well, I love that example. So let's map that up to what that is. So what you're talking about is user interface and user experience, right? UI UX. Yes. And that fits into any digital transformation, because that's the way you're going to interact with your customers. And when you talk about business outcomes backwards, it's the same importance of what your customers want moving backwards, because you were talking about a website, right? So imagine you put out a website that's clunky, they can't access it well, and your competitors have one that's very easy to use. That's going to be a hands down decision from the users on the other end of this. And that's going to affect sales. That's going to affect your interactions. And that'll make all of your technology interactions and efforts worthless if you can't reach enough of your customers because you have an unusable product out at the customer point. So that's a key component, and that's all part of the journey. And UI UX has become very, very important these days for all those reasons. That's a great example, Syed.
Thank you. All right. now, why do digital transformations fail? So
Yes.
why do they fail? Yeah.
So this is what we talked about earlier, right? So I wanted to give a few examples because I think if people understand this, that's important. So again, one of the things I keep talking about is business needs to drive the technology and not the other way around. I think, unfortunately, most businesses do it the other way around. Again, like I said, there's a separation. They'll have an IT or an engineering organization that are building technology. It's loosely applied to the products or what you're trying to sell to your customers. But a lot of times without a cohesive bond and a leadership, keeping those business outcomes in the forefront, you can tend to go into experiment mode or proof of concept mode on technology, and you'll start spinning yourself and you can't tie any KPIs to it on the business side or show that it works, right? So when you don't have business driving the technology and you don't have that foresight and vision for where the technology needs to go, it can get lost into that spinning technology realm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Second reason is lacking top-down support. So the other thing that I talk to companies about in digital transformation is it's important for it to be done cross-collaboratively, transparently, and as a strategic initiative. So if it doesn't have that top-down support, it's easy for those features to get lost. And like I was talking about, the silos and the things that happen between organizations, and you can get lost in the technology. The same way you get lost if the technology doesn't have the business guide, you can get lost in the process if you don't have the right leadership that can get you to the end point of that process that you want to go as well. And a third reason I'll give real quickly is not being able to clearly identify the goal of the transformation. So being transformational is an important part of digital transformation. And if you can't understand even what you're transforming or why you're doing it, again, you're going to get lost in technology and you're not going to really have a true north or a place to move in your transformation. So we're going to talk next about how to build those the right way from the beginning, but that not doing that leads to how those really fail.
Got it. So if you find any of these you can say symptoms, if you will, or these challenges, then you know that maybe this is not going the way it's intended to go.
Yeah, and the good news is at any point these are rescuable, but again, you have to do what we're going to talk about next, and you got to bring in the right features and the right people and the right parts of the process to get this back on track and to really move it forward.
Got it. Okay. So how do you ensure that your transformation succeeds, right? Like
Yes.
A lot of people here are part of transformations or going to be part of different transformations. So how do they go about doing that?
So this is the part I love, because this is the process that I built out through all my years of wearing all the different hats and through many successful transformations. And I like talking about this, and hopefully people can start to see that when we go down these paths, we can avoid those failures that we were talking about, and we can make the entire process significantly faster. And faster leads to quicker success and a way better ROI, because you're not wasting money and time for everybody as you go down this path. It's a whole new world when you can get to successful outcomes on digital transformations. So let's go through those. Business must lead technology is at the very top. I've kind of pounded on that one as we've talked here quite a bit, but I cannot emphasize the importance of that enough. We just talked about how things fail when they go in the opposite direction. What this looks like is important, and we'll talk about how to lead that. You have to have leaders that have done this. I see some questions on the side about how you position IT projects so they're not considered a cost center, or so that they're transformative. If you can tie your projects into business outcomes, and you can find executive leaders all the way up to the CEO that have their main outcomes are driven by the success of your technology, you've made that tie. And this is what I tell people. How am I going to get to the CEO? How are we going to talk about those business deals? Well, you just have to find commonalities that they're interested in, right? So when I talk about CEOs, any CEO, and this is in any organization, they're going to have 5 top things that they're going to be concerned about. They're going to want top line growth. They're going to want bottom line growth. They'll want to beat their competition because usually people are in a pretty tough competitive situation. They're going to want to diversify their offerings, and they're going to want to generate new revenue streams. If you can run down that list and you can find business outcomes for your organization that affect any one of those, the CEO or some executive leader in your organization will be happy to talk to you about it and about how you would apply technology into doing that. And that keeps you out of that technology rut. And not only does it keep you out of the technology rut, but it provides you a map and the direction on what technology to use, what partners, how to use it, if a technology is superfluous or not, and if it actually helps to drive the business outcomes. It is a true north, and the process greatly benefits itself by having this from the beginning.
Absolutely.
The second one,
go ahead. There is top line and bottom line growth. Like for some people, they may not really understand what that means. If you could just give.
Yeah, so top line growth is more revenue, right? So we sell widgets, and if we sell more widgets, we make more revenue, right? Bottom line growth is how much profitability you're making on it. So if the widgets cost $9 and we sell them for 10, they're not very profitable. There are a lot of digital transformations and a lot of technologies that can make the whether it's software, hardware, whatever, it can make the widget cost $5. And now all of a sudden, even selling the same amount of those, you're making a lot more profitable money, which there's a lot that a company can do for that. So the different times in companies' life cycles, one or the other might be important, right? Depending upon the business goals they want to drive. But both of those are definitely able to be affected by the right technology and the right digital transformation if it's tied out to the right business needs. Does that answer your question, Syed?
Yep, absolutely. Because there are a lot of people on the technology side, so they may not understand like top line and bottom line, So thank you for that. Go ahead.
Okay. Second really important one is that digital transformation itself isn't just you snap your fingers, flip a switch, and you're transformed. It is a process. And it needs to be run as a strategic initiative, and it needs to be done through collaboration and transparency. Why? Because it ends up touching all parts of the organization. If we go out to those 5 things the CEO worries about, the reason organizations have 5 or 6 organizations inside of them is to serve all of those 5 main functions. So they all have roles that play into this. And if you're not touching some of those roles, you're not doing a holistic function and you're not serving the business. When you go and try to do this, when I talk about it being a strategic initiative, a lot of times organizations will give this to people inside the organization to run it. And it's a second job for them, right? They've got day jobs. They're already running marketing. They're already running the IT organization, making sure that ticks on a daily basis and doesn't go down. They're already running an engineering organization. So it's difficult to truly call this a strategic initiative unless you have people that are focused on it and can lead it that way. When you look at collaboration, it's tough in organizations because there's always going to be silos. No matter how great the culture is, again, that divide that we talked about business and technology, that also lives between silos and organizations because everyone knows their jobs really, really well. And there's going to be some, crossover that's going to be difficult if you don't have a leader running this all the way through. And there's always going to be politics as well, right? So it's important to get through that and to be clear. Collaborative. And then the third one that I always talk about is this actually being transformative, right? So what does transformation mean? And I've been giving Syed this example as well. In my early days in technology organizations, it was a big deal to bring in consultants. I don't know if everyone can remember Franklin Covey. That was the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and they also had Moving at the Speed of Trust. Organizations, big organizations, would hire them to come in and consult. And what that would look like is they'd give you their book. They'd tell everybody to read it. And then they'd have some in-person sessions reviewing the concepts, doing some dress rehearsals on using them in business. And then the third phase would always be actually applying them in business. And I would say that was always the most difficult part, right? Because how do you actually take what you learned in a book and a classroom and apply it how you work day to day? And it would make a difference based on the employees themselves, how much they soaked in and internalized the information. Well, the interesting thing I see about digital transformation is if it's done right, it involves all the employees directly in the process of it, right? So as you're driving those business outcomes, as you're changing the way that you do business, everybody's involved in the whole process. So it doesn't just end up being transformative for the business itself, it's transformative to your users, it's transformative in your ecosystem, and it's transformative into the employees in the company because they've been involved in a process where they've seen it go through, they've seen its success and failures, they've seen it derail and get put back on track, and they've seen an actual outcome out the other side. And I'll argue that anybody's that's involved in that process can't even help but coming out the other side transformed. And it's that practicality of the transformationalness of this, if it's led directly, that I think is both beautiful and really important to the process. That makes sense, Syed?
Absolutely. One side note here, maybe it's related here, but this is a question that has come up for some time, that there are some consulting companies that are definitely doing a lot of help with companies on digital transformation. So one of the issues that a lot of leaders say is, number one, these companies come in, they can do a project, but there's really no knowledge transfer to the people who are already working in the company, right? So these people come in, and they do this project. Maybe it's a technology implementation, which obviously, hopefully, drives something for customer centric, or makes something easier for the customer, or makes the makes it top line or bottom line growth better. But the people working within the company do not get that delta, like the knowledge transfer or from these consulting companies, and maybe there's a reason there are reasons for this. But how, as a person who is responsible for some of these transformation, how would you go about making sure that some of that knowledge is taken in the company, that the host company, if you will?
I'm glad you asked that question. And there are some very specific reasons for why that happens. So I'm going to talk through those because that answers the question, and then I'll lead directly into it. So the example you gave is, there's a lot of consulting firms that'll go in and they'll do jobs for companies, right? And there are a lot of consulting firms that build themselves as job shops. And what do I mean when I say job shops? Well, they've got a lot of bodies because software and development takes a lot of bodies a lot of times. And that's not a core competency of organizations, right? They might manage technologies, but they don't all develop technologies. So when you bring in these partners, they'll come in and they'll do that for you. And what happens is, those pitfalls that I talked about, or the organization themselves that are asking for help, they haven't necessarily drawn that line to the business outcomes themselves. They're just building some new technologies for whatever reason that they're doing it. And they're trying to find the right people to supplement the building of that technology. And all the things I talked about, the pitfalls and the things that need to happen for this to work correctly, get lost in that process of just doing more jobs. So the responsibility of that falls in twofold. It's the organization that's asking for the help, them understanding their business and knowing that they need a process. And then the consulting firms themselves, if they're a good consulting firm, with the job shop and the way that they're doing things, they'll also bring these processes into the organization. So you need the leaders in the organization, and you need the right consulting firm that understands the process as well to bring this process together into the organization. So when you're hiring a partner, you're not just saying, hey, I need you to fill out this technology box, bring a bunch of bodies, and deliver this box to us by a certain date. That's a job shop, and that's a function. But you go to your partner and you say, hey, I have this business need. We're leading this in the organization. We need someone with expertise on the development side to come in. We're going to provide for you functional leaders from all our different parts of the organization, and we're going to lead the business outcomes with your technology that you're developing, so that we do this in partnership and holistically to achieve that outcome, right? So there's that responsibility for the company that's asking. And then there's even the responsibility that there's oftentimes, and this is what I do in digital transformation, is the company will say, we know we need to do this. We don't know all the steps in between it. and we don't know how to tie the technology to the business. So if you can really find a helpful partner, they can help you tie the business back to the technology and then help you do the technology as well, and do that transformational part by making you a part of the process, your team a part of the process. Because no matter how well they can tie a business outcome, the company initiating the request is always going to know their business better than anyone else. So having the people that know their own business and a third party coming in with different perspectives and different viewpoints, you can bring those together. And if it's led the right way, you can have some wonderful outcomes for the business and that are transformative. So does that distinction make sense, Syed, between the two of just getting a job shop or running it as a strategic process, which is exactly what I'm talking about? And these things happen often. These are the reasons for success or failure, is making these decisions.
Super wonderful. Yes, 100%. All right. So tactical information, right? Like brass tacks. Like, what can people do today to get information, or more than information, learn about transformations, right? Some people, let's say, they may have been involved in some projects, but learning the process and learning more about it, what can be done?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this works for anyone that's even at the executive level or anybody who's a contributor in an organization, right? So, what we talked all along were about the processes, running this as a strategic initiative. I think it's very important to involve somebody who's actually carried out successful digital transformations, right? Having somebody focused on doing exactly this is important. And then what happens is, as we talked about, they then can lead and by example on successes, on things that have worked and things that haven't, and people learn by doing it, right? So having someone there to do that is crucial to success, but it's also crucial to learning as you go to my next point, which is getting involved yourself, right? So no matter which part of the organization you're in, when you can think of ways that you can drive business outcomes with technology, or technology can support some important initiatives in the company that are big initiatives for the organization, if you're doing a digital transformation, either lead it or get involved. If you can't, be involved in the process, because that's where the muscle memory comes from that we were talking about earlier, about learning and being transformative. Or go into your executive ranks and make some suggestions, make a pitch. Hey, we've been looking at this technology. We believe this can drive these business outcomes. Collaborate with them and see if you can't start digital transformations yourself, or at least make the ideas and get them moving with teams. I think these are all great ways to do it. And then, like I said earlier, wearing as many hats as you can in the process. Go around and if you can, be involved in the actual business portion of this and see where that works and where it doesn't work. Go back and learn new technologies that you can apply that might be an easier way to enable something that you're looking for on the other end, right? All of that about getting involved and understanding both sides as much as you can is really important. And again, using the mentors and the leaders and having people lead these strategic initiatives that have done them, the muscle memory and being around them is really important, right? And then rounding yourself out, being into those roles and educating yourself. Digital transformation's a big topic these days on the internet. If you go out there on Harvard Business Review, all over the place, they'll show you digital transformations that work, that failed. Even if they're not in your industry, you'll be surprised how much the business drivers for those overlap, right? You're going to have some different customers with some different needs, but the business overlap is usually there, and you can apply those as long as you're doing, part of the process, we didn't talk about this as much, is understanding the customers, going out and understanding stakeholders. One of the things that I do in my process is called human-centered design, and that's using the customer and stakeholder wants and needs to drive business viability and technical feasibility. Getting involved in that whole process, or understanding where that's worked and failed, will really educate people on what to do, right? There's a lot of opportunities. This is it's not only a buzzword, but it's happening regularly, and getting involved is always going to be the best way to learn and to move forward.
Absolutely. That brings up another story. Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, actually did this once. Starbucks had taken off, and then he basically handed it over to somebody else, and then he had to come back because it wasn't growing as quickly. So he actually sat down with customers and, bought them coffee and said, why do you come here? What would you like to see? So, just getting the feedback directly from the customer directly. There's no filter in between here. So, like, I think that's awesome. But I mean, for some companies, it may not be maybe that possible for somebody in technology to go out to the field, if you will, right? Like it may be a firm somewhere, far away. It may not be a customer buying coffee in some cases, right? So yeah.
Yeah, but again, so there's two ways around that, right? So if you have a strategic person leading this, they are going to do this as part of the process. So by you being involved, you'll be getting the feedback, at least from the people that are doing it. You'll be seeing the outcomes of that. Or in your organization, if you wanted that, your sales and marketing team are talking to customers all the time. And if you can help them, if you can collaborate with them and direct them on the right things to understand, or even to just understand the business needs, and then collaborate in your organization to say, okay, if these are the business needs that they need, how do we intelligently tie technology to serve these the best, not for the sake of technology, but to actually serve these business needs. And if you can be the one that are making that case or bridging that gap, that's a big difference maker, and that will transform.
Absolutely. All right. So I think that was it from just let's look at the questions. I think you answered the questions as well. And I think the last one is in terms of your experience. I think in terms of numbers or scenarios, if you can give the audience, like in terms of transformations, like what are some of the, let's say, growth that you've seen, or in terms of top line, bottom line, or like return on investment on some of these transformations? Because if somebody's trying to sell to, let's say, the board of directors for a publicly traded company, then it would be, it all boils down to how much are we able to, generate from this, this thing that we're going to implement here. How much are we going to get back, right, at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to want to know how much they have to invest and what the return on that is going to be, right? And that's the business case. That's what really makes the case for this. That's what turns something from being a cost center into being a strategic investment, right? And that's where you want to get to. So one of my favorite examples is I worked with when you talk about, this is transformation at its maximum. So I worked with a steel company that was 100 years old, that had built their business, that they manufacture the products into the mining business, right? So again, that's a tough business where you're bending metal and forming plastics and putting them out in harsh environments in the middle of nowhere. And they were doing this all mechanically with no intelligence around it whatsoever. So they decided that they were going to be the first in their industry that was going to build some intelligence into their products, which means now all of a sudden bending metal and forming plastics, they had to become a software company. They had to become an electronics company. They had to interface with their customers and their users electronically, which was totally different from the phone calls and the paper ways. So this was a major transformation that they had to do. And to justify it, they looked at what their investment was going to be. They figured they had to invest about $4 million in the transformation itself. But they were able to see on the other side that the product that they built was kind of like razor blades, right? It was a replaceable business. And because it was so disconnected and in the middle of nowhere, and they relied on partners and contractors, they didn't know if they were being replaced on a regular basis. But now all of a sudden, if you added intelligence, you knew where things were, you knew the life cycle of them, you can force those replacements across the installed base that they already had. And they figured out that could bring in another 19 million in profitable business for them moving forward if they were to build a system like this. And that doesn't even count new sales, doesn't count their competitiveness in a commodity-based market, right? When all of a sudden you've got the product where people can manage their entire business better by having your product. How does that make you look competitively in a commodity-based business? It changes the game. So that was measurable. They were able to go after that, and it didn't even cover all the other outcomes and things that they would change from their organization and their business on out to the customers. And it was a lot of fun, and they've got a really neat system in place today.
Awesome. Wonderful. So with that, those are great words to end with, I guess, today. And for all those who are watching or are listening in some cases, there will be videos that, the recording will be sending that out. And then we may have some gifts, or you can say polls, if you will, that we will also send out with those recordings as well. So happy Friday, everybody, and we will touch base in a couple of weeks. This is a transformation series, so definitely we will be reaching back out in a couple of weeks as well. All right, talk to you guys soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.